What if African gods are more present in biblical history than you ever imagined? What if everything we were taught about the God of the Bible is just a part of a much older, much deeper story, and extremely disputed in the spiritual world? Today, I want to take you on an eye-opening, dangerous, and, for many, unacceptable journey. Because what you will hear in this video challenges the structure of modern faith, confronts institutionalized theology, and exposes a spiritual war that has been hidden for centuries. Most people believe that the battle between good and evil comes down to angels versus demons, light versus darkness. But what if I told you that there is a much older spiritual conflict fought between Yahweh, the Hebrew God, and a set of ancestral African deities known as the African Pantheon? Orunmila, Ogun, Shango, Exu. These names do not appear in the scriptures that you know. But does that mean they weren't there? Or were they deliberately erased from a narrative that aimed to silence the spiritual powers of an entire continent? Today's video will show you that the spiritual history of humanity does not begin with Genesis, much less ends with the apocalypse. There is a web of conflicts, a secret battle, where ancient African gods fought directly with Yahweh for dominance, worship, spiritual territory, and mainly for the heart of humanity. You will understand why certain texts were excluded from the Bible, why some people were demonized, and why African rituals, despite their ancestry, were labeled as pagan or evil. Are we talking about African mythology or a real, powerful spirituality that survived colonization, imperial Christianity, and religious censorship? Get ready to delve into one of the most forbidden and avoided topics in traditional theology. We will expose documents, oral traditions, and historical accounts that suggest that spiritual warfare was not just a metaphor. It was literal, real, and continues to happen today, behind the scenes of modern religion. We are not here to disrespect any faith, but rather to lift a veil that has been placed over the true spiritual history of humanity. Because while many only look at the sky of Israel, they forget that Africa has always been there, not as an extra, but as a protagonist. Yahweh is, without a doubt, one of the most revered entities in history. But what you never heard is that he was not alone. The spiritual field was populated by many entities, many forces, many voices. And amid this divine multitude, conflict was inevitable. This video is an invitation to the hidden truth, the forbidden mystery, the revelation that few dare to face. The confrontation between the African Pantheon and Yahweh is more than theology. It is a battle for spiritual identity, for narrative, for ancestral memory. So stay with me until the end, because in the next few minutes, we're going to explore what has been silenced. Let's unpack how this war shaped modern faith, and most importantly, how this revelation can transform your view of God, spirituality, and purpose. If this content has already stirred something inside you, if this introduction has made you question what you believed to be unquestionable, then leave a like right now. This isn't just a simple gesture. When you like it, YouTube understands that this topic is relevant and starts showing this video to other people who are also looking for answers. And comment below, have you ever heard of this battle between Yahweh and the African gods? Do you believe there are spiritual forces at work behind modern faith? Your opinion is essential. This channel is a space for awakening, for the confrontation of ideas, and above all, for spiritual expansion. When you comment, you don't just participate in the conversation. You help build a community of searchers who aren't satisfied with ready-made answers. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you are not already part of this journey. Here, we are not afraid to delve into the hidden mysteries of the Bible, the secrets erased from history, and the spiritual battles that traditional religion preferred to hide. Also, activate the bell, because the next videos will delve even deeper into this forgotten conflict between spiritual worlds, and you won't want to miss anything. Now, take a deep breath. Because what comes next will further shake the structures of what you know as faith. Let's go back in time, to the origins, until the moment this war began. To understand how this spiritual battle between the African pantheon and Yahweh became invisible to the eyes of modern faith, we need to go back a lot. Back before the printed Bible, before Western pulpits, even before the division between mythology and theology be established. Because the truth is that everything starts with the construction of divine images, and with who has the power to decide which of them will be remembered and which will be erased. Yahweh, a sacred, profound name, revered by Jews, Christians, and even Muslims under other names, is presented in the scriptures as the only God, creator of the heavens and the earth. But what many don't know, or prefer to ignore, is that Yahweh did not emerge alone. He did not appear as the only God in a spiritual vacuum. In fact, he emerged in a context where several gods were worshipped, feared, and invoked throughout the ancient Middle East region. The Hebrew tribes, from where the cult of Yahweh came, lived in constant contact with people who worshipped Baal, Asherah, El, Moloch, among others. These gods were part of the spiritual reality of those times, with their own rituals, temples, priests, and texts. In fact, in many archaeological records, Yahweh initially appears as a tribal deity, associated with war, thunder, and the protection of the Israelite people. Over time, and this is essential to understand, Yahweh went through a process of exclusivization. What does this mean? It means that he was being presented not just as the God of Israel, but as the only true God, while everyone else was labeled as idols or demons. And this is where things start to become spiritually and politically delicate, because while Yahweh ascended as the central figure of Scripture, deities from other cultures, especially Africa, were systematically demonized. This was not just a religious movement, it was a spiritual, cultural, and imperial project. On the other side of the map, the African continent already had, for millennia, extremely complex living spiritual systems connected with nature, ancestors, and the invisible world. The Yoruba pantheon, for example, is made up of entities known as Oriksas. Each Oriksa represents a force of nature, a cosmic energy, and at the same time, a spiritual personality. Exu, the messenger, guardian of the paths. Ogun, the lord of iron and war. Olorum, the supreme divine source. Oxum, the lady of fresh waters and fertility. Zango, the king of thunder and justice. These entities are not just gods in the Western sense of the word. They are living energies, spiritual archetypes, manifestations of the sacred in symbolic and real form. And for thousands of years, they have been revered by millions of people, not as myths, but as guides, acting forces, everyday presences. Now stop and think with me. How were these spiritual powers so rooted in their culture and faith summarily erased from biblical history? Why are the Oriksas never mentioned in theology classes? Why were their names associated with witchcraft, evil, darkness? The answer is harsh, but it needs to be said, because this was a spiritual and cultural war fought in the name of religious hegemony. During the expansion of Christianity and Judaism, especially in the eras of colonization, the confrontation between Yahweh and the African gods was disguised as evangelization. But in fact, what happened was a process of spiritual annihilation. African religions were labeled as pagan, ancestral rituals were banned, and the cult of Yahweh was imposed as the only valid path to the divine. Geographically, these worlds coexisted. Did you know that Africa itself appears several times in the Bible? Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, they are all African territories with ancient traditions. In fact, it is in Egypt, the spiritual heart of ancient Africa, that Jesus lives his first years of life. Yes, the biblical Messiah was protected and spiritually formed on African soil. This is no coincidence, this is a symbol, but theologically these worlds were cruelly separated. The sacred texts were selected, edited, translated and retranslated by hands that already carried the weight of prejudice against everything that was considered non-Jewish or non-Christian. And so, the African pantheon was removed from the sacred scene. Not for lack of presence, but for too much threat. Because yes, in the eyes of the dominant religion, the Oryxars represented a threat. Exu, for example, was wrongly associated with the devil, with chaos, with evil, a perverse distortion that to this day generates fear, ignorance and prejudice. But Exu was never the devil. Exu is movement. It is communication, it is justice that crosses the paths of the spirit. Ogun is not a demon. He is the archetype of strength and technology, of advancement. And Olorum, the supreme Yoruba god, is not another pagan god. He is, for many, the very manifestation of a unique force, as divine as Yahweh. Therefore, when we talk about a spiritual battle between the African pantheon and Yahweh, we are not talking about a war between good and bad. We are talking about a clash between spiritual systems, between ways of understanding the divine, between voices, that which were silenced so that only one could be heard. And what impresses me most is that to this day, this conflict still echoes. In churches that demonize religions of African origin, in the faithful who are afraid to pronounce the name of an Oryxar, in theologians who completely ignore the spiritual richness of the oldest continent in the world. It's as if the war never ended. It just changed shape. Now tell me in the comments, have you noticed this spiritual exclusion in the story they told you? Have you ever felt that there was something beyond what was taught in services, in masses, in official books? If so, comment below with the word awakening, because this is our moment to reconnect with erased truths. And if you are beginning to understand that there is much more between heaven and earth than traditional religion dares to explain, also comment, I see the invisible. This helps me know who is truly diving into this journey. Don't leave there. What comes next is even deeper. Let's continue uncovering the hidden proofs, the evidence, the spiritual and historical records that have been ignored, but never truly silenced. But what you may not have realized yet, and this completely changes the way we look at modern faith, is that there is a direct, powerful, and forgotten link between the African continent and the narratives of the Old Testament. A link that was hidden over time, but which, when revealed, dismantles many theological certainties and opens space for a deeper understanding of ancestral spirituality. Let's start with the obvious one that few dare explore: biblical geography. When we think of the Bible, most people imagine a distant land called Israel, perhaps a small strip of desert and mountains. But if you open an old map, you will see that the biblical stories unfold in a region where Africa is glued together, literally intertwined. Egypt, for example, is mentioned dozens of times throughout Scripture. It was there that Abraham went to seek shelter. It was there that Joseph ruled, and it was there that Moses was born and raised. Egypt is Africa. And Africa not only appears as a setting, but as a cradle of spiritual formation for many biblical characters. Now follow me in a simple reasoning. If Egypt, which is Africa, was where Moses formed as a leader, and where Jesus spent part of his childhood, then African spirituality cannot be ignored as a background element in the very construction of the biblical narrative. But that's just the surface. When we talk about African people and their relationship with the Israelites, we are not talking about simple diplomatic meetings or territorial wars. We are talking about cultural, spiritual, and even genealogical exchange. It is documented that there were marriages between Hebrews and Ethiopians, alliances between African kings and Israelite leaders, and even prophets and biblical characters who had African ancestry, such as the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon in search of wisdom, and took with her not only gifts, but spiritual knowledge that echoes to this day in Ethiopian traditions. There is also an intriguing passage in the Old Testament that speaks of Zipporah, Moses' wife, who was a Midianite, that is, from a people who inhabited the region of North Africa. And if Moses, who directly received the 10 Commandments, lived with a woman of African origin, we can infer that there was more spiritual and cultural mixing than modern theology admits. Some independent scholars, and even archaeologists, have already raised bold, but extremely plausible, hypotheses that the ancient Hebrews maintained intense exchanges with nearby African cultures, and that elements of their spiritual practices may have influenced the temple liturgy, chants, priestly vestments, and even the tribal organization of the 12 tribes. If we stop to observe the structure of the rituals described in the Pentateuch, with animal sacrifices, use of incense, anointing with oils, dances and percussive music, it is impossible not to notice the similarity with elements present in African-based religions to this day. This is no coincidence. This is shared spiritual heritage. But why was this connection severed, forgotten, distorted? Because the history of faith was also written by the victors. And the winners, in this case, were those who managed to impose their religious narrative as unique and absolute. As the centuries passed, the African presence was diminished, the spiritual contribution of black people was silenced, and any attempt to reconnect with these roots came to be considered heresy, paganism, or simply a deviation from the correct doctrine. The very image of biblical characters was changed. If you have ever seen representations of Moses, David, or Solomon as white men with light eyes, you are facing a colonizing cultural product. Africa was always present, but it was visually removed, so that it could be removed spiritually. And that is why today so many people are unaware of this profound link between the African pantheon and the sacred history of humanity. And as much as this subject bothers, it needs to be said, because recovering this link is not just an act of historical justice. It is an essential step towards the spiritual healing of a people who have been disconnected from their ancestry. Many feel a void in their faith, not because they have lost God, but because they have lost the way to their own roots. Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps your soul is looking for answers that are not in the marble altars, but in the fires of the ancestors? That perhaps your spirit recognizes melodies, symbols, and colors that have been taught to be dangerous, when in fact they are rightfully yours. This reconnection is not a fad, it's not rebellion. It is a return to what has always been sacred but has been hidden. And as you understand this link, you begin to realize that the war between Yahweh and the African gods was never a war between good and evil. It was a dispute of narratives, of power, of spiritual domain, a desperate attempt to suppress that which could not be controlled. And here is something that may surprise you. There are oral records in several African traditions that talk about the presence of white or foreign entities who arrived imposing a new vision of God, demanding exclusivity, asking for total sacrifice. In many cultures, this was interpreted as a spiritual invasion, a cut at the roots, a new cycle where the African sacred would be persecuted, but never destroyed. If all this makes sense to you, if this connection lit something inside you, comment below with the word reconnection. And if you feel that your faith needs to go through a reunion with your ancestry, write "I remember who I am" in the comments. Not only does this show me that you're really here, it also sends a signal to the algorithm itself that this content needs to be delivered to more people like you. And we're still just getting started. Because now, let's go a step even deeper. Let's explore a startling revelation about the forgotten gods and what they represent in that invisible field where modern faith refuses to look. Stay with me. And now that you've begun to reconnect the threads between ancestral Africa and biblical narratives, the time has come to face one of the most uncomfortable and at the same time liberating revelations that challenge everything taught in modern churches. Because if you were raised hearing that there is only one God and that he reigns absolutely over the entire universe, get ready to question this absolute based on the sacred text itself. I'm talking about the word Elohim. Yes, the one that appears in the first verses of the Bible. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. But there is one detail that was ignored for a long time. The word Elohim in the original Hebrew is in the plural. That's right. Elohim does not mean God in the singular, but rather gods. And that one piece of information changes everything. Think about it with me. If the original text says that the gods created the heavens and the earth, why was this plurality eliminated throughout the translations and doctrines? What was behind this theological choice of transforming the plural into singular? Was there an interest in hiding the fact that in the beginning there were other gods, other forces acting in creation? And would Yahweh be just one among these Elohim? This question alone causes a spiritual earthquake. But we need to go further. If Elohim represents a divine collective, then we are facing a spiritual reality much more similar to the ancestral pantheons than to the rigid monotheism that we were taught. And if the Bible admits this collectivity at the beginning, logic leads us to think that Yahweh stood out among these beings, perhaps because of his strength, his strategy, or his spiritual warfare. This even explains why in so many moments in the Old Testament, Yahweh presents himself as the Lord of hosts, spiritual armies, heavenly wars, territorial disputes not only in the land of men, but also in the invisible domains. We are talking about a conflict between real spiritual entities with different purposes, different energies and conflicting views on humanity. And here, what begins to emerge with force is the mirror with the African pantheon. You see, when we compare Yahweh's attributes with traditional African entities, we notice something curious. There is an overlap of powers, there is a similarity in functions, but with profoundly different intentions. Yahweh, for example, appears in the Bible as the God of thunder, fire, battles, and judgment. He opens seas, sends fire from the sky, commands armies. Now listen to this. These same manifestations are attributed in several African cultures to Oryxars, such as Zango, Lord of Thunder and Justice, or Ogun, Oryxar of War and Iron. Here, he who opens paths with a sword. Then you begin to realize that the natural elements associated with Yahweh, fire, thunder, war, storm, are not exclusive. They also appear in the African pantheon, but under other names, with other stories and other ways of relating to humans. This is not to say that one is a copy of the other. No, the truth may be even more powerful. We are talking about universal spiritual archetypes, distinct manifestations of the same creative energy that have revealed themselves in different ways in different cultures. But then, why did Yahweh need to override the other Elohim? Why was it necessary to erase the other names, the other faces of the divine? Because this war of powers was not just a spiritual dispute. It was also a dominance strategy. The Yahweh presented in the Old Testament demands exclusivity. He declares, "You shall have no other gods before me." He persecutes those who bow to other entities. He punishes entire peoples for different cults. This is called spiritual centering. It is the monopoly of faith. And here is the most important point. While Yahweh demanded exclusivity, the African pantheon always worked with multiplicity. The Oryxars never competed with each other to be the only ones. On the contrary, each one acts in their area, in their energy, and they are all parts of the same spiritual body. There is a principle of balance, of respect for spiritual diversity, which simply disappeared with the advancement of religion based on exclusion and divine hierarchy. This difference in spiritual structure between Yahweh and the Oryxars reveals a lot about the conflict. While one builds a theology of obedience and authority, the others propose a spirituality of connection and responsibility with nature, with ancestors, with the very essence of being. And that, for many, is dangerous. Because a faith that liberates, that connects, that returns power to the individual is a direct threat to systems that are sustained by control. The war between Yahweh and the Elohim is not over. It has been camouflaged, hidden in modern theologies, but it still reverberates. Every time someone is taught to fear everything that is ancestral, everything that is African, everything that does not fit into the Western mold of spirituality, this war continues to be fought. Perhaps now you understand why so many people live in internal conflict between what they feel and what they have been taught, between the intuition that calls them to the roots and the doctrine that threatens them with condemnation. It is Yahweh's war against the Elohim being lived out within the souls of thousands, a dispute that is not just theological, but emotional, identity, spiritual. If you are here, still watching, still listening, still feeling, it is because this message is finding space within you. And this is already a sign that something is awakening, que algo está voltando à superfície. So I want to invite you, comment below on the phrase, I listen to the Elohim, if you feel that there are more spiritual voices trying to reach you than the one you were taught to follow. And if this content is opening your spiritual eyes, also write, war is real, because recognizing this invisible battle is the first step to positioning yourself in it. And don't worry, we'll go even deeper, because the next stage will reveal how this ancient confrontation manifests itself in our days, in religious practices, in internal conflicts, and even in social structures that still try to decide who can or cannot access the divine. Stay with me, because the invisible is about to be exposed before your eyes. Now that the spiritual structure of this war has been exposed, it is time to turn our eyes not to the distant past, but to the invisible present. Because contrary to what many think, or were led to believe, African gods were not buried in ancient times. They are still alive. And not only alive in memory or mythology, but active, present, manifest. We are talking about a spirituality that pulses, that responds, that guides. A spirituality that is alive, powerful, and, above all, ignored by those who insist on treating the African pantheon as a simple legend. For centuries, the term mythology was used as a weapon to minimize, diminish, and ridicule the beliefs of thousands of people who maintained their spiritual practices based on the connection with the Oryxas, the Vodans, the Inkwises. But look closely. What is called a myth in Africa is called a miracle in the Bible. What is seen as folklore when it comes from Candomblé or Umbanda is venerated as doctrine when it comes from Christian pulpits. This difference has no spiritual basis. It is rooted in the colonization of the sacred. And here is the truth that many hide. African spiritual entities have not disappeared. They were persecuted, hidden, disguised, but never destroyed. In African-based rituals carried out to this day, in tereros, in and Akse, in silent encounters with ancestry, Exu still speaks. Ogun still walks. Oxum still heals. Yansa still spins with the wind. They are not tied to books or museums. They are in movement, in vibration, in active listening. It is common to hear reports of people who participated in serious rituals, led by prepared priests and priestesses, and who clearly felt the spiritual presence descending upon the environment. A different force, an energy that cannot be explained, but can be felt. Many describe it as something that passes through the body, a vibration that shivers, that dominates, that transforms. It's not an invention, it's not theater. It's manifestation. There are reports of legitimate incorporations where the entity speaks, dances, advises, and heals. Cases where people left a ritual with answers they didn't even know they needed. And we're not talking about psychological suggestion. We are talking about something deeper, a spiritual presence that enters, expresses itself, and then leaves. This is recognized in practically all religions, except when it comes to religions of African origin. Why? Because accepting that the Oryxars are alive means admitting that there is another way of accessing the sacred that does not go through the official religion. It means admitting that it is not necessary to follow westernized doctrine to have contact with the divine. And this breaks the monopoly of faith. This returns spiritual autonomy to the people. This reconnects the soul with its deepest roots. And that is exactly what the dominant religious system does not want. This denial of African spirituality as legitimate is a continuation of the same spiritual war that began millennia ago. The difference is that today it is expressed through prejudice, ignorance, and fear. When someone says that Exu is the devil, they are repeating a colonial discourse. When someone avoids a ritual because they think it is evil, they are echoing centuries of spiritual oppression. But when you start to listen to the reports of those who live this spirituality authentically, you realize that there is a different spiritual code there. More sensitive, more direct, more visceral. The Oryxars are not far away on unreachable celestial thrones. They are close. They are in the elements, in the wind, in the earth, in the water, in the fire. They are in the body that dances, in the mouth that sings, in the drum that calls. And what many don't realize is that this spirituality is alive precisely because it was not written to be plastered. It was lived, transmitted, incorporated. She is memory in motion. And like every living form of spirituality, it is dynamic, adaptable, sensitive to time and space. But he is never absent, never dies. There are cases of inexplicable healing attributed to spiritual interventions carried out with the help of the Oryxars. There are processes of deep emotional liberation occurring in tours, in baths, in sung prayers that activate forgotten codes within the body. People who were completely disconnected from themselves rediscover their center, their strength, their mission, not through ready-made religious formulas, but through listening to their ancestry. And do you know what is most impactful? Even in the face of so much repression, this spirituality remains alive. Keep resisting. It continues to expand. Even with churches on the side of toreros saying that there is only demon there, the sons of saints remain firm. They continue playing the atabaques, steadying the points, lighting the candles, keeping alive what the books couldn't erase. Perhaps you have never participated in such a ritual. Maybe you just heard about it, or maybe I felt scared. And that's okay. Fear is the first symptom of programming. Fear comes from ignorance. But now you are being exposed to a new perspective. A vision that does not come from imposition, but from revelation. You don't need to accept anything blindly. Just watch, feel, listen. And if any sound from this speech is echoing inside you, perhaps it's because a part of you, perhaps the oldest part, is trying to wake up. If this part touched you, if this living spirituality begins to make sense in your heart, comment below on the word, I feel the call. And if you have had any kind of experience with a spiritual presence in African-based rituals, even if it was subtle, even if it was a long time ago, write, I saw it with my eyes closed. These phrases are not just forms of engagement. They are spiritual statements. They help the algorithm, yes, but they help even more to strengthen the chain of those who are seeking to rediscover their essence. And don't leave, because in the next block, we're going to dive even deeper. Let's explore how this silent spiritual warfare manifests itself within culture, language, memory. The battlefield is no longer just between heaven and earth. It is within us, and it's time to see this clearly. Stay with me. While many believed that the greatest spiritual war was between heaven and hell, between angels and demons, or between the good and evil in the traditional sense that theology has imposed, few realize that one of the most silent and cruel wars in history was fought between the most read book in the world, the the Bible and the ancestral spiritual traditions of the African continent. A battle that was not won with swords or thunder, but with words, translations, interpretations, and doctrines. It is necessary to say clearly what has been systematically camouflaged for centuries. Colonization was not just geographic, political, or economic. Colonization was also spiritual, and perhaps this was the most profound of all. Because when you take a people's land, they can recover it. When his culture is stolen, he can rebuild it. But when your connection with the divine is destroyed, with your ancestors, with your oryxars, with your sacred memory, it is like ripping the soul out of a body and replacing it with a mask. During the invasion and domination of the African continent by European empires, the Bible was used as a weapon. Yes, that same book that teaches love, mercy, and compassion has been transformed into an instrument of spiritual domination. Christian missionaries were sent along with soldiers. Cross and sword went side by side. While one shot, the other baptized. While one plundered, the other taught that there is no God but ours. While one burned villages, the other said, "Your religion is of the devil." This is how the process of erasing African gods began. A planned, intentional erasure that aimed to disconnect an entire people from their spiritual heritage to make them easier to dominate. Imagine, you rip out the language, the history, the symbols, and finally, the most serious thing, you tell these people that their God is not real, that your rituals are sin, that their oryxars are demons, that the only way of salvation is in the God that the oppressor brought with him. This is not faith. This is spiritual manipulation. And the most frightening thing is that this war did not end with official decolonization. She continued. It persists to this day in the speeches of churches that shout against African-based religions. It persists in temples that carry out campaigns to expel Exu, as if Exu were evil itself, without even understanding what or who Exu is. It persists in cults that teach that offerings are works of witchcraft, without ever having studied the symbology, ancestry, and purpose behind them. The spiritual conflict behind the evangelization of Africa is one of the most hidden chapters in the history of faith. Many pastors and priests who settled in African lands said they were there to save souls. But the truth is that they were there to replace a living spirituality with a theology of submission. Baptism was used as a rite of erasure, the catechism as an indoctrination tool, conversion as control certificate. And you see this in the historical accounts themselves. Many African people did not resist the Christian faith because they lacked belief in God, but because they already had their own relationship with the divine. They were not atheists. They were spiritual. They already knew the sacred. But when they refused to give up their gods, they were punished, tortured, or accused of witchcraft. Either they converted by force or they were silenced. And this silencing has survived to this day. This is why today so many young black people are ashamed to say that they frequent a terreiro. This is why so many mothers and fathers of saints suffer persecution, intolerance, and even physical attacks. This is why Afro-religion is still marginalized, even though it is one of the most profound, complex, and beautiful spiritual expressions of humanity. The Bible was used as a shield from colonization, and this is not a criticism of the scripture itself, but of the way it was interpreted and imposed. Because there is nothing wrong with believing in Yahweh. The problem is when this belief is used to erase other legitimate forms of connection with the sacred. The problem is when it is said that there is only one way and all the others are of the devil. But let me tell you something. This imposition never completely destroyed the African spirit. Do you know why? Because true spirituality does not die. It may be buried under centuries of oppression, but it always comes back. It always resurfaces. It always finds a way to manifest itself in songs, in drums, in dances, in memories. The Oryxar may be silent, but never absent, and the Bible, no matter how much it has been used as a weapon, also holds secrets that confirm what they tried to erase. In several passages, we find evidence of divine plurality, of contact with other spiritually developed peoples, of the existence of entities that were not demons, but different spiritual forces. The very presence of African people in the Bible, as we said before, reveals that African spirituality is not outside sacred history. It was silenced within it. Do you understand now why this war is invisible? Because it doesn't happen with bombs. El happens in the words you hear, in the doctrines that you repeat without questioning, in the fears that were planted inside you, in the names you learned to hate. This war happens every time you look at your ancestry with suspicion, every time you kneel to a God that was imposed on you and reject the sacred that runs in your blood. But now something is awakening. Now the veil is falling. And the more you listen, the more you understand, the more you reconnect with what has always been yours. Not to abandon a faith, but to rescue a truth that was ripped away from you, to balance the forces, to end a war that should never have started. If this speech made something move inside you, comment below on the word, "I recognize war." And if you are beginning to see how this spiritual war was built to take you away from your origin, write, "My ancestry calls me." I read all the comments, and each sentence of yours strengthens this spiritual current that we are forming here. The journey is not over yet. In the next section, we will explore the Church's purposeful silence and why this knowledge remains prohibited to this day. Because if you think you've heard the loudest, there's still a lot that's been hidden from you. Stay with me. Now that you've begun to see how this spiritual warfare was carefully designed over the centuries, it's time to name the system that fueled this erasure, the Western Church. And here, it is important to understand that when we talk about church, we are not talking about true faith, pure spirituality, love for others. We are talking about a power structure that was organized under the name of God, but that acted like an empire with dogmas, laws, armies, crowns, and above all, fear. From the beginning of Christian expansion across the West, the Church realized that controlling faith was the most efficient way to control bodies, minds, and nations. After all, whoever dominates a people's beliefs dominates their morals, their habits, their choices, their fears, and even their hopes. And in this brutal logic, there was no room for spiritual plurality. There was no place for Oryxars, for gods with different names, for deities that did not obey the imposed model. It was necessary to erase everything that did not bow before the cross. And this erasure was meticulous, systematic, calculated. The process began with the narrative. Throughout the councils and translations of the scriptures, the names of other deities that coexisted with Yahweh were excluded, transformed into symbols of evil, or simply ignored. What was plural was converted into singular. What was different became heresy. What was ancestral was transformed into sin. Yahweh began to be presented not only as the true God, but as the only, exclusive, jealous one. And anything that broke this mold was considered spiritual betrayal. But why so much effort in hiding the existence of other deities? Because if people knew that other cultures also had contact with the divine, that there were other legitimate paths of spirituality, that there were other holy names, other sacred manifestations, the power structure would collapse. Yahweh's exclusivity was a theological and political strategy. It was not just about faith, but about domination. The Church knew that allowing people access to their spiritual roots would open up space for autonomy, and spiritual autonomy is a danger to those who want to maintain control. A people who connect with their ancestry do not submit easily. A people who understand that their spirituality was not born in Europe, but was imported with blood, does not bow down to dogmas without questioning. and this type of awareness was, and still is, seen as a threat. Therefore, the church built a system in which questioning was a sin, doubting was rebellion, and seeking outside the doctrine was considered flirting with the devil. The Oryxas, the African gods, the spiritual entities that were part of the daily lives of millions of people were demonized. Exu was associated with the devil. Ogun was transformed into a war spirit. Oxum was branded a seductive and deceptive entity. All this to cut the tie, break the bridge, disconnect people from their original spiritual source. And the cruelest thing is that this process was internalized. Many began to repeat this speech without even knowing its origin. Today, there are black people who are afraid of their own spirituality, who reject their ancestors, who see their traditions as something to be overcome, when in fact they were taught to hate themselves spiritually so that they would remain submissive. This is the invisible legacy of erasure. Within the churches, the name of Yahweh has become synonymous with absolute truth. But this truth was built on ruins of burned toreros, of silenced drums, of forgotten languages, of deities buried alive in the collective memory. And the most serious, even texts that suggested divine plurality were removed, hidden, reinterpreted. The people did not have access to the complete version of the story. They gave you a Bible, yes, but a Bible shaped, edited, fitted to reinforce a single spiritual line. Many still ask themselves, if the Bible is the Word of God, why were so many books deleted? Why were so many chapters missing? Why are there so many contradictions between the versions? The answer may be uncomfortable, but it is clear, because whoever held power over sacred texts also held power over spiritual narrative. And for Yahweh to reign absolute, it was necessary to erase all other thrones. This does not mean that Yahweh is false, evil, or non-existent. It's not about that. What is at stake here is not the veracity of a deity, but the injustice of monopoly. The problem is not Yahweh. The problem is the imposition of Yahweh as the only possibility, as the only path, as the only source. And this, historically, was done at the expense of silencing thousands of deities, many of them African, who were transformed into caricatures of evil without the right to defense. The silencing promoted by the Western Church has created a deep spiritual wound in millions of people. A wound that bleeds to this day. Every time someone feels an internal call to a different spirituality and is repressed. Every time someone feels their heart beat faster when they hear an atabake, but they feel guilty because this is from the enemy. Every time a black child grows up learning that their African name needs to be Christianized, to be accepted. This pain has a name. This pain has a history. This pain is part of the invisible war that the church tried to hide but is now being exposed. And that's why this video exists, to show you what many tried to hide, to shine a light on what has been kept in the shadows for so long, to give you back the right to choose your own spiritual connection without guilt, without fear, without submission, because you have that right. It is yours by origin. He is yours by blood. It is yours by ancestry. If this part of the journey touched something inside you, if it reminded you of a wound you never knew how to name, comment below on the phrase, "I break the silence." And if you feel that you have been taught to reject your own spirituality, write, "I recover my spiritual memory." I want to read your comments, not only to strengthen our movement, but to show the algorithm and the world that this conversation needs to reach more people. Don't leave now. In the next section, we will compare in an even more direct way the similarities between Yahweh and the African gods, revealing that perhaps what separates these deities is not essence, but narrative. And that, my brother, my sister, changes everything. Stay with me. So far, we have exposed a hidden spiritual war, a systematic erasure of African ancestry, and the willful silence of Western religious institutions. But now, let's open an even deeper portal, and perhaps more uncomfortable for those who grew up believing that Yahweh is on a throne, separate from everything and everyone. Because what I'm going to show you now may reveal that the differences between the biblical God and the African gods are not as great as they made us believe. Perhaps what separates them is not essence, but narrative. And maybe, just maybe, Yahweh and entities like Ogun, Zango, or Exu share more than they seem. Let's start by observing one of the most striking aspects of the figure of Yahweh in the scriptures. He is presented as a warrior, a God who commands armies, who fights alongside his people, who destroys entire nations, who defeats enemies with his fury. In Exodus, he appears as the one who opened the Red Sea and destroyed the Egyptian army with the waters. In other texts, he is described as Lord of Hosts, one who rides the heavens with thunder and fire. Now, think about Ogun, the Oryxa of iron, war, combat, advancement, conquest. Ogun is the one who opens paths with his sword, who does not back down from the fight, who represents the archetype of active strength, courage, divine action in the world. He is also the Lord of technologies, of the transformation of matter, of the fire that molds iron. The same fire that in many biblical passages involves the presence of Yahweh. Yahweh is also called the consuming fire. On Mount Sinai, he appears enveloped in fire, thunder, and smoke. It is feared, revered, and often described as destructive. This aspect is very reminiscent of the power of Zango, the Oryxa of justice and thunder. Zango is not just a judge. He is the thunder that falls to restore balance. He also punishes with divine force, but always to restore order. He is also linked to fire, to celestial electricity, to the power of speech that carries the weight of truth. Sound familiar? And what about Exu? Many associate it with chaos, transgression, to the messenger of crooked paths. But Exu is, in fact, the great communicator. He is the link between the worlds. Nothing happens without passing through it. And what do they say about Yahweh's first manifestations? That he was a God who revealed himself directly, who sent messengers, who spoke with an audible voice, who opened paths, who tested men at the crossroads of life. The difference here may just be the way they told the story. There are those who say that monotheism, when consolidating itself, did not completely destroy the symbols of local deities, it merely absorbed them. He took the attributes of various spiritual entities and fused them into a single divine figure to consolidate power, to unify faith, to construct a new narrative. Yahweh then becomes the warrior as Ogun, the fire as Zango, the communicator as Exu, the supreme creator as Olorum. But all of this is presented in a centralized, vertical manner, with no space for other names, no room to share the throne with anyone. And this raises a serious question. Is the one God of Western faith really unique? Or does he carry within him the fragments of the divinities that existed before he was imposed as sovereign? Could it be that what many Christians worship as exclusive is in fact a collage of many ancient gods, now under a new name, in a new guise? This hypothesis does not diminish Yahweh. On the contrary, it reveals that he may be a concentrated representation of various manifestations of the sacred that existed long before the Bible was written. And if this is true, the war between Yahweh and the African gods was never about who God is. It was about who has the right to be called that. See, throughout history it was not uncommon for expanding cultures to take the gods of conquered peoples and absorb them, changing their names, their functions, their myths. This happened in the Roman Empire, in ancient Greece, in Egypt. What if the same thing happened to Yahweh? What if he carries in his spiritual structure traits that previously belonged to Ogun, Zango, Exu, Obatala? You may even resist this idea at first. It's natural. After all, we have been conditioned to think of God as something separate, untouchable, exclusive. But start paying attention to the attributes. Compare the stories, feel the vibrations. When you hear thunder and think it is a sign of divine fury, who is manifesting there? When you feel the force opening paths in the midst of chaos, who is leading? When you hear the fire crackle and see justice manifest, what energy is acting there? These questions do not have a single answer, but they have a purpose: to provoke awakening. Make you see that perhaps, deep down, the division between divinities is not spiritual, it is political. Perhaps the war between Yahweh and the Oryxars was manufactured to keep the people separated from their own inheritance, and perhaps the reunion between these spiritual powers is the missing step towards a profound reconciliation between faith and ancestry. If all of this starts to make sense to you, even if just a little, comment below on the phrase, "The similarities don't lie." And if you feel that Yahweh's attributes do reflect aspects of the Orishas, even if you've never thought about it before, write, "I see the fusion of the gods." Your comments not only fuel channel engagement, but help build a community of seekers who are willing to look beyond what they've been taught. And don't think it's over. What comes next will open your spiritual eyes even further. Let's talk about the revelation that is emerging in our times, the return of forgotten entities, the reactivation of dormant forces, and the collective awakening that is shaking the foundations of modern faith. Stay with me. What is coming now is spiritual. And so we come to a point that many still dare not explore: the return of the gods. After centuries of silence, erasure, and persecution, African spiritual forces begin to reappear, not as legend, but as a living reality, felt and recognized by millions of people around the world. This is not just a religious movement, it is a profound spiritual restoration, a reconnection that challenges all modern faith and questions the limits of what has been taught as sacred. In recent years, we have seen a wave of revival of African religions. Young people who were previously discouraged from knowing their ancestry, who had their parents or grandparents persecuted for maintaining traditional practices, are now beginning to look for a way back. Akse houses, candomblé terreiros, Umbanda centers, Vodun temples, places where ancestral energy still pulses, are once again frequented, respected, understood. But more than that, there is a growing awareness that this spiritual recovery is not just cultural, it is strategic, it is historical. It is as if something is awakening from within, something that has been patiently waiting for centuries of oppression to emerge. Full strength. The return of the African gods is not just symbolic. It manifests itself in the physical and invisible world. Every ritual, every offering, every song, every drum that echoes is an activation of forces that were dormant. It is a response to decades and centuries of attempted silencing. It's a movement of spiritual reconquest that is not only personal, but collective. When someone reconnects with Ogun, for example, they are not just performing an act of individual devotion, is reactivating an archetype of strength, protection, and transformation that reverberates throughout humanity, albeit in a subtle way. When someone calls on Exu, it is not just spiritual communication. It is opening paths that history tried to lock with invisible chains. And when Oxum manifests, healing and fertility return to the body, mind, and spirit of those who recognize the ancestral legacy. And this African spiritual restoration also presents itself as a form of invisible revenge. Not in the sense of human revenge or physical conflict, but on the spiritual plane. While official history attempts to erase, delegitimize, and demonize African gods, these energies are returning stronger, more conscious, more present. They did not come to compete with Yahweh directly, but to claim their legitimate space in the spiritual field of the planet. To remind the world that there are multiple ways of connecting with the divine, that African spirituality never disappeared, it was just made invisible. This spiritual revenge manifests itself in ways that many people do not yet realize. It can be felt in dreams, in presentiments, in the vibrations that pass through sensitive bodies. It can express itself in music, singing, dancing, in the pulse of the drums that don't stop calling. It can appear as an invisible force in people's internal conflicts, awakening intuitions, bringing clarity and strength to those who were disconnected from their roots. Africa, which seemed distant to the West, now returns through the energies of its gods, its traditions, and what could never be erased: living ancestry. And if you pay attention, you will realize that this return is not just a spiritual or cultural phenomenon, but also a social and psychological one. Black youth and adults who reconnect with their traditions find not just spiritual strength, but identity, self-esteem, purpose. They begin to question the imposed religious monopoly. They begin to see the historical manipulations, erasures, and distortions. They begin to realize that there is no sin in celebrating what is yours. There is no crime in reconnecting with the Oryxars. There is no harm in claiming ancestry. On the contrary, there is healing, empowerment, and truth. This African spiritual restoration also challenges traditional monotheism. Western religious logic has always sought to place Yahweh on the absolute throne, erasing all other deities. But today we see that this is not sustainable. Ancestral energies return with force, showing that the sacred is multiple, diverse, and that spirituality cannot be monopolized. That what has been silenced for centuries is reappearing, and that any attempt to repress it is met with invisible but powerful resistance. And this leads us to an even deeper reflection. How many spiritual truths have been buried for the sake of authority? How many connections with the divine were blocked to keep a people submissive? How many powerful energies, so linked to life, the cosmos and nature, have been labeled as cursed or dangerous just to consolidate power and control? The return of the African gods shows us that these energies cannot be imprisoned, that the ancestral spirit does not bend to repression. That spiritual memory can be silenced, but never erased. If you are feeling something move inside you while listening to this, comment below on the phrase, "The Gods Return." And if you have ever felt the presence of an ancestral African energy in your life, in dreams, intuitions, rituals, or spiritual experiences, write, "I feel the call." I want you to participate because each comment strengthens this chain of rescue and visibility and helps other people realize that they are not alone in this awakening. And don't leave now, because in the next section, we will explore in an even more intense way how these invisible forces manifest themselves in people's lives and in the spiritual paths of the modern world. Let's get in direct contact with the signs of the ancestral presence, those that have escaped the official narrative and that continue to influence our spiritual reality today. Stay with me. Wow. If you made it this far, it means you really wanted to discover the truth behind this spiritual war between Yahweh and the African pantheon. This shows that you are open to seeing the invisible, to questioning narratives and reconnecting with something much bigger. So now I want you to do something that will help not only you, but also other people who are looking for these answers. Leave your like right now, because this simple gesture helps the video reach more people who need to hear this message. And more, comment below with the phrase, "I awakened," if you felt that this journey brought some revelation to your spiritual life. I want to read each comment and see how many people reached the end and are awakening along with me. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now. Here, we continue exploring the invisible mysteries, spiritual secrets, and truths that challenge modern faith. Activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next revelations. And before you leave, watch the next video that appears on your screen, because it will go even deeper into everything we discussed here. It's the continuation of this journey, and you won't want to miss a thing. Remember, only those who reach the end understand the full extent of what is happening. So comment, like, subscribe, and dive in with us in the next video. Your spiritual journey is just beginning.